Now that you have been inspired by the amazing work of our Export Awards winners, let's learn more about how an international trade agreement is actually reached. Daniel Ujczo is Senior Counsel for Thompson Hine in the firm's International Trade and Transportation Practice Groups. His practice focuses on providing end-to-end counsel across clients' Canada, U.S., North American, and global supply chains. Dan's unique Canada-U.S. experience encompasses serving in the governments of Canada and the United States, private practice, and academia. He served as an officer in Canada's Foreign Ministry, where he worked toward improving North America's borders and ports of entry. For nearly a decade, Dan was a visiting professor of law at Case Western Reserve University School of Law and managed a lab that served as a legal advisor to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. Coast Guard. But wait, there's more. His public service has also included a wide range of accomplishments, having served as a career judicial law clerk to the Honorable Judge Peter C. Economist. In that capacity, Dan participated in federal and civil trial litigation and performed by designation in cases pending before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. And now, let's hear Dan's presentation, the rest of the story.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for the introduction today. I'm a little bit disappointed that, well, just as the clock starts ticking here, I'm a little bit disappointed that I didn't get to see the soups and sandwiches video. I don't know where I was supposed to click to see that. I was looking forward. I'm based in beautiful Columbus, Ohio, so I'm a few hours ahead. So lunchtime was a while ago, but it was making me hungry, and what a star-studded cast of exporters to follow. That's just an amazing group of companies, and even a more amazing group of people. And I just have to give a special shout out to Carol Colombo. I mean, there is just no question that somebody that has worked tirelessly for the trilateral relationship. And when the comment was made that Arizona's voice was heard during the USMCA negotiations, that was without question. Arizona, and I'm sure Carol will be the first one to say it wasn't just her. She deserves a lion's share of the credit. But it was groups like the Phoenix Sister Cities and the Canada-Arizona Business Council with Glenn Williamson and the Arizona Chamber, and just a whole litany of folks around the Sun Valley and throughout the state that just did an amazing job as we got the agreement, the new NAFTA or USMCA or CUSMA or MEC, and we'll kind of use those terms interchangeably today. I want to just offer a special debt of gratitude to the Phoenix Sister Cities. It is just top-notch organization, proud to have been a part of and working with, and also Rita, who just does an amazing job. But this is also a little personal to me beyond my professional side, is right before the pandemic, which, last March to I think all of us seems like 100 years ago, I took a flight from Sonora, where I was doing some business with a client, to Calgary, where I was seeing some other clients, and then flew back down to Phoenix. And it was actually the very last business trip that I took prior to the pandemic, where I was at the Canada-Arizona Business Council with Glenn Williamson, and then stuck around for a few days, caught some spring training on the side for my beloved Cleveland Indians, and then went to the Global Chamber there with Doug Brunke and the gang. And I was just thinking about, wow, what an amazing, it's a year and change later. But just yesterday, I got my second vaccine shot, and here I am. So I'm getting old enough to believe that there's no coincidences in life, but the fact that we're here today with three of these great metro regions and broader state and just the linkages on our continent is just kind of a personal, wow, it's come really full circle a year later. So I look forward to being with you, but I also raised that one thing about that second shot is that I got a little dehydrated overnight. So you may see me take a sip here or there over the next 20 minutes or so. I'm using red Solo cups, so I feel like I'm back in college all over again here today. But, my charge this afternoon is to talk a little bit about where we are and the rest of the story on USMCA. And, I kind of laugh because here we are with these three powerhouse regions and metros here today that were really the backbone over the last 20, 30 years, if not longer, of North American business. And as we've heard throughout the day, and what a great day it's been here, right? These sessions are just masterfully planned. It's been a lot of fun, right? We've all been through a lot of Zoom meetings and conferences in the last year. This has been fantastic today. But what's been exciting is that these three regions are on the cutting edge of what's coming next in the North American economy. And just shy of a year ago, about this time last year, we completely renovated the North American economy, the framework that governs our economy. And we haven't really talked a heck of a lot about it. I don't mean just here, I mean generally. We don't really talk a lot about USMCA. I've said a lot that the new NAFTA came into force a bit like a 2020 wedding, right? Many of us had family and friends that got married. I actually knew somebody that is actually younger than me and got married for the fourth time. I said, I think he should be buying me gifts by now. But you go to a wedding in 2020, and we got formally hitched in North America on July 1st of 2020, but we didn't have the party and the rollout, right? In fact, USMCA kind of came and went with a whimper. And part of that was because the enforcement agencies mercifully, and I think thankfully, said for the first 6 months of this agreement, we're going to use restrained enforcement. We're going to kind of slap people on the wrist if things are out of whack, but we're going to give some time to phase this in. But that changed on January 1st of this year going into 2021. Now, some of it, as was just mentioned a moment ago, that some of it is because volumes are down a little bit on trade just because of the pandemic and what's happening in the global supply chains and in continental supply chains. But we're going to start seeing USMCA come into force, and I think it's going to get a heck of a lot more attention. I also think it's going to be very important in terms of attention because that's where this administration is on the U.S. side of the coin. Keep in mind that our new United States Trade Representative, Ambassador Catherine Tai, was instrumental in getting that agreement to the finish line when she served as the chief staffer in Congress. She was the key to the whole thing. We were together many times during the negotiations in countries, and in Canada and Mexico when there were negotiating rounds there. And she has said the U.S. isn't doing anything on trade until we get USMCA right. And I think that's certainly true for our partners in Canada and Mexico as well. And when you also look where we are right now, where we're going in the United States with the new Biden and Harris administration, is clearly the focus is on the pandemic. And infrastructure, as has been talked about today as well, is coming right behind and will likely have to address migration issues, just as a matter of course, pretty soon as well. But there's also three main areas. Number one is there's a review of supply chains happening right now. And that review that's going agency-wide, looking at things like that we've been talking about today, electric vehicles, autonomous, pharmaceuticals, et cetera, that is all happening, and that paperwork will be done by the middle of the summer. On Buy America, one of the first executive orders came out. That executive order and the Made in America center of government that's going to look at how global trade works with Buy American preferences, that will be ready probably by August. And that's on top of infrastructure bills and renewable energy and climate, et cetera. So all of these things are really heading for this summer to fall, where there will be some changes coming for companies that are engaged in supply chains. And my personal view and professional view as well, from our vantage point at Thompson Hine, we represent companies all throughout the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And I have to tell you that our view is that this is going to be very positive for North American trade, for companies that understand what's coming. And it also is going to create some great opportunities for our metros. My perspective, and I want to quickly move on to the substance here, but I'm an international trade and transportation lawyer, so I'm all about moving stuff. That's what I do. It's customs compliance, USMCA, tariffs, China, you pick it. That's what I do. But I also work, as we said, in Canada, US, and North America with economic development agencies. So I move a lot of companies throughout our three countries, not picking up stakes and leaving one country and going to the others, but expanding. And so a lot of my work is done with economic development officials and architects and engineers and banks and site selectors, et cetera. And that's an exciting time because you get to see companies in growth mode and excitement. And then the third thing is for many of those companies I serve as external general counsel, in some cases become a corporate officer of the companies. And I'm actually involved right now in the largest privately funded economic development project on the Canada-US border. We're basically building 2 new cities really cities that are there and have been there for a really long time. But we're rebuilding and renovating those to take advantage in part of USMCA. So my view is that we're living this. I kind of live and breathe this as to what's going on within our economies. And I hope that that's, for those of you, particularly those of you from the 3 metro regions, there should be a great deal of excitement. So where are we going with USMCA? 3 things I want to touch on today. Number 1, what is USMCA, what it is, and what it isn't. Number 2 is where are there opportunities? And there are many opportunities in this new framework. And number 3 is where do we expect some challenges? What challenges, but also the rest of the story, as the session is entitled today, is where are we really going? And how does this connect with all of the other things that are going on in the world? And so starting with that first piece, again, I want to come back to that timing and tempo issue. USMCA is really new. It seems like it's been here forever. And as I said, everything before last March seems like it's been here forever. But USMCA, we started the process in 2017, and it was bumpy. We started this in August of 2017. We had the first negotiating round. We went to Mexico City in September. In late September, early October, we were in Ottawa for the 3rd negotiating round. And I've shared this with some of you that are likely on the line that we hosted a reception. I'm a member of AmCham Canada, and we're on the American Chamber of Commerce for Canada. I'm on the national board, and we hosted a reception for the 3 negotiating teams. And I have to tell you, at that reception, which came after 3 or 4 days, long days of negotiations, there wasn't a drop of Jack Daniel's Canadian Rye or tequila left on the shelf. The negotiations were hot, they were heavy, and that's when it became clear that the Trump administration in particular was looking for some significant changes in the old NAFTA, now USMCA. And then we hit some impasse, and then there was some discussions around the auto sector, largely a Canadian proposal. And throughout 2018, the negotiations kicked forward in earnest, and we were running between Montreal and Mexico City. And frankly, we stopped having full negotiating rounds and just focused on various sectors. And then we were kind of like college kids. The negotiations got done at the very last minute with Mexico in late August of 18. We finished with Canada. I can tell you that lasted until the very last minutes at the end of September 18. And then we signed the deal in Buenos Aires. Not we, but the 3 leaders of the government, the leaders of the 3 governments signed it. And then it sat. There was this interesting dynamic on the Mexico side, much like when President George Herbert Walker Bush got the NAFTA done and signed it, but handed it off to President Clinton. EPN in Mexico handed it off to AMLO. And then as it sat through the early part of 2019. And why in part did it sit is because we were dealing with China and we still had steel and aluminum tariffs on Canada and Mexico. And Mexico and Canada had retaliated against our country. And it wasn't until May of 2019 that when the first China deal fell through, that Mexico raced to the White House. As soon as news broke that we were not getting a deal with China, that first deal, Mexico raced to the White House and they beat the Canadians by like a half a second, I think. Maybe the next Trilateral Phoenix sister city, we can actually have like an Olympics to see who's really faster. But Mexico got there and said, you have a problem with farm country right now because you're not opening up the China market, Mr. President. Lift those steel and aluminum tariffs and we'll lift our retaliation on particularly U.S. corn. And Canada said something along the same lines, and the tariffs were lifted, dealt with again and again and again, but I think we actually hit the finish line on steel and aluminum tariffs, at least for now. And then the deal kind of started going on in 2019 to get through the various governments. And that's when Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats, and I think this is very important, many people in the trade world said this trade deal, USMCA, already looked very kind of left and Democrat and progressive. Then the Democrats in Congress actually started going to Mexico and Canada and having working groups around areas like labor and employment and several others. And the Democrats put their polish on it throughout 2019. And again, as we know, Congress doesn't do anything until the last minute. And so at the end of December of 2019, the U.S. Congress finally said that's enough. And the deal was done with some major additions that were put on by the Democrats. Just as a sidelight, I actually got risky at that time. And I actually said, I don't think they're going to get it done this weekend. And I had a long scheduled December trip with my now 10-year-old to Disney World and Universal Studios. So of course, that's when the deal closed. So there I was running on the phone while I was on the line with Harry Potter for Harry Potter rights and those kind of things. So it was a funny time, but there is an interesting historical point as well, is that USMCA, keep in mind, that's when we were going into the first impeachment. And there was a small window to get a deal done. There is kind of just a funny kind of point, is if Speaker Pelosi had not held the articles of impeachment, would we have got USMCA done before COVID? And I don't think we would have, actually. So it was a good thing we got it done. Mexico quickly ratified the US. It passed Congress, not with the largest margin ever, but pretty close. And Canada passed its version, CUSMA, on its way out the door to shut down Parliament in the wake of the COVID pandemic in March 2020. Folks, that's only a year ago. Again, it seems like ancient history. And our respective agencies did an amazing job of getting the deal together and getting the uniform regulations, the things that people like us and businesses on the ground deal with every day is not so much the language of the agreement, but the regulations that implement it. And so July 1st, it came into force. We've had this period of maximum flexibility, and here we are. But I have to tell you, on the ground, what we saw was somewhat unsurprising. What we saw was a lot of companies wanted to know what was going on with USMCA in February, March, April, May, June, July, up and through Labor Day, so September of 2020. But then it got really quiet because it wasn't being enforced, right? And so I do think there are a number of companies out there that haven't done the work to get ready for USMCA. So things could potentially get bumpy here as we go into full implementation. Now, one important thing about USMCA, and I'm not going to get into the weeds because I want to talk about the opportunities and then where do we go from here in the remaining 15 minutes or so that we have before questions. But what I want to say is, just because a company qualifies for NAFTA doesn't automatically mean that they qualify for USMCA, CUSMA, or TMEC. In fact, one of the major changes in USMCA is that even if you do automatically qualify, you still have to show your work. And so there's a significant compliance obligation and record-keeping obligation. So companies, if you're a company right now and you're saying, I haven't done the work on USMCA, you need to talk to your legal advisor, your customs broker, et cetera, who are working with you on your past NAFTA work in USMCA to make sure that you have that paperwork in place. And that shouldn't be seen as a customs compliance. I have to tell you, I've had so many companies. I've worked with several thousand companies and getting them ready of all shapes and sizes, from the large OEM, automotive and manufacturing companies, all the way down the supply chain to technology companies, agriculture, et cetera, textiles, et cetera. And companies that actually put in a little bit of time and sweat equity, it actually becomes beneficial because I'm confident that many of you can appreciate this. A lot of companies haven't looked at their NAFTA compliance in 20 years or 15 years. It is not uncommon when we say, how did you come up with this under NAFTA? Well, that person doesn't work here anymore. She left the company and we've just been using the same stuff. So it's also a good time to refresh. Now, that's been challenging, of course, because so many companies in the last year, so many of my clients, my own companies, we've been struggling just to keep the lights on, right? And deal with PPP and pandemic and employees and safety and all of these issues. But now's the time. Now, what did we do in USMCA and where are the opportunities? Well, number one is I've said, and any of you that have heard me talk over the last while, I tend to use the same letters for things. And I've used this example because I just think it's the perfect one. President Trump said he was going to renovate North America. And I thought, what a perfect phrase for a real estate mogul turned president. But that's what we did. We didn't rip up NAFTA. 60% of the agreement's largely the same, but with some enhancements. But we didn't, it's not a rebrand. And that's a very dangerous thought for folks out there. And it's not just dangerous from a compliance perspective. If you're sitting in Sonora, Alberta, or Arizona right now, you're going to miss opportunities in the agreement if you don't realize that it's more than a rebrand. It is a renovation, and that means we'd, number one, put a fresh coat of paint on that 60%. And that has made North America more competitive and will as time goes on. Number two, we put in new fixtures and appliances. We added areas in digital trade. We added areas on the border in terms of the movement of goods. We still got a ways to go on the movement of people in North America, but we're doing much better. I'm an ex-border guy, as you heard at the beginning, and you compare the world that we were at immediately after 9/11, 2001 to the time that we're in now. In fact, how we're operating in COVID, at least from the movement of freight perspective, represented 15 years of homework, if not more, after 9/11. There's not a doubt in my mind we would have shut the borders down completely to trade had we not had that experience and the work that so many of you on this line did as we worked on our ports of entry over the last 15, 20 years. And then the third area, though, is that we did knock down and put in new fixtures and appliances, or knocked on walls, excuse me, and build new structures. And nowhere is that more evident than automotive and advanced manufacturing. We also dealt with issues around textiles. And those are new structures. We put in labor and environmental provisions, much stronger than were in the prior agreements. And that's where there will be some disruption in North America. Now, rather than go kind of chapter and verse as to each one, that's what I do for a living, right? What's the big picture in each of those areas? Well, here's the good news. The opportunities are on those fresh coats of paint that I mentioned. We've made it wonderful for companies that are manufacturing in North America or processing in North America, investing in North America. If you're a company that's sourcing raw materials from either this continent or from around the world and doing the additive value, the highly skilled work, the negotiators spent a lot of time in this agreement going through and making it easier. So I give examples of polymers, chemicals, coatings, paints. It used to be a nightmare to move those products in North America. You used to have to know where every molecule came from around the world in chemicals. And that includes some in the energy sector, oil, natural gas, et cetera, the distillate and issues of that nature. What we did in USMCA said, hey, look, there's about 7 to 9 new tests in the agreement, but at the end of the day, they come down to one principle. We don't care where it's from. We just care that you're doing the high value and mixing it here. If you're creating jobs here and you're creating that additive value here, life is going to be good for you. And if you're sourcing, you don't need to source everything from North America. What you need to do is source the raw materials here, bring those in, and do that highly skilled and even medium skilled labor here. You will find a lot of benefits in this agreement. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, where there's benefits, are future industries. A number of things that we talked about today: electric vehicles, UAVs, highly advanced chemical engineering, areas in the services sector, protecting intellectual property, digital. We've created to make North America the most competitive region in those areas. Now, that does come with disruption because so much of those supply chains prior to this time relied on sourcing from Asia and China in particular. Right now in the electric vehicle market, electric vehicle, all of the minerals are usually made somewhere else, usually Asia, Australia. There's actually a significant amount of the raw materials in Quebec as well. But right now, most of the cells that create electric vehicles are not made here in North America. And those cells become a battery pack, become a module. Those modules become a pack. I do a lot of work in the EV space. So those beginning components are not here now. And so there's going to be disruption because we've made it really hard to import those things. And so there's a short phase-in period of about 2 to 3 years where we're going to see disruption. But the goal is that folks will have to invest in North America and create jobs here in those new and emerging areas, the future of our automotive industry, the future of our energy industry. So places like Hermosillo and Calgary and Phoenix that have been really cutting edge and have been doing work in the food processing sector, energy, automotive, the maquiladoras, et cetera. The next generation is protected by the USMCA if we use it correctly. Now, where does the challenge come from? The challenges really come to those existing supply chains that are not in the raw material area and are not in those advanced areas. What's going to happen is semi-finished product. If your supply chain relies on importing semi-finished products, not just the bearing, but the bearing and the wheel hub, and bringing that in to North America, well, there's going to be some challenges there. And the agreement makes it trickier. And the goal is to create a North American production chain. There's a lot of talk right now about made in North America or buy North American. And we're watching very closely what the Biden-Harris administration is doing with that executive order. The truth is USMCA is buy North American. It really is. If we use it correctly, it has the ability in some of those sectors that I mentioned to really create a buy in North America and source in North America component. Now, I want to just say with some of the challenges that are coming, USMCA did not promise dispute-free trade. It promised a mechanism to deal with disputes. And so there are dispute resolution programs, but we've already worked on things like steel and aluminum. We have issues around dairy with Canada. There's a growing list of issues with Mexico right now with electricity, potatoes, and now organic certification. Mexican trucking in the United States is always an issue. The good news is that we created a framework for dealing with that. And so that means, unfortunately, the media and folks like myself, we get on TV and we get the newspaper and things like that. Nobody wants to talk about the good things. They always want to talk about the disputes, right? But that's where I really urge those of you on the line to really dig into this agreement and to look at those areas and say, look, where can my company benefit? Where can our region, our metro benefit? And I'm telling you, as somebody that has spent a lot of time on the fine print, there's a lot of good news in this agreement. Now, one shortfall is that we just didn't do much on the immigration side. The good news is we kept the NAFTA immigration system. The bad news is we kept the NAFTA immigration system. We didn't get rid of it, so we still have things like TN visas and NAFTA visas, et cetera, but we still have a ways to go there. And I think hopefully our three countries can get smarter on that. Just in the final few minutes that I have before the questions, what I'd like to do is just say, where is this all going? I'm from originally Youngstown, Ohio. It's the kind of place that Bruce Springsteen sings songs about. Truly, he did sing a song about it. Steel mills, auto companies, et cetera. And I've said many times, and some of you I know on the line today have heard me say, where I grew up, NAFTA is not a four-letter word, but if you said the word NAFTA, you were going to hear a four-letter word come flying back at you. The animus to trade that we see not only in the Midwest, but I travel all over the continent. There are places in Canada, there are places in Mexico, and in the U.S. Southeast, in the Carolinas, in the U.S. Northeast. Trade, NAFTA was beneficial. There's no question about that. But where it did cause injury, it hit hard. And the political movement around that, where people had said for years, one day you're going to need our steel and it won't be there. One day you're going to need our vaccine production and it won't be there. Right? So I think what we have to realize right now is that the last 4 years of trade and tariffs, and I'm not supporting one administration or the other, but what I'm saying is the trajectory that started in the Trump administration that you could say goes back 30 years to 20 years to 10 years, reasonable minds can disagree where this all started, is that we are talking about a new trade environment. It's a managed trade environment. It's not open season around the world anymore. Global supply chains are important. That's my business. But I think what we're also going to see is the U.S. government take a really hard look in partnership, hopefully, with Canada and Mexico to see what does the future of supply chains look like. And there's a real opportunity right now for folks in Canada and Mexico. Mexico, depends on how you count, has about 60 trade deals around the world, including with Europe and the Trans-Pacific Partnership with Asia. Canada has just shy of that. Canada's done an amazing job creating a trade platform around the world. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time on is looking for our U.S. companies, Canadian, Mexican companies, et cetera. How do you create a continental supply chain that connects to the rest of the world? But one thing that I just fundamentally believe that we will see, not only over the last 4 years, but again, when that started before, reasonable minds can disagree, but I guarantee you for the next 4 years, is that we may take a different trade policy. It may sound a little bit different. We're not going to use tariffs and threats and tweets and tirades, but the language of rebuilding, it's going to be more about rebuilding, investment, worker-centric policies, labor-centric policies, et cetera. And my friends, that's managed trade. And the good news, I think, for companies operating in North America, that's going to inure to our benefit within the continent. And so that's why I'm very bullish in working with economic development organizations and elsewhere on companies investing. And there are no three regions better positioned than Calgary, Phoenix, and Hermosillo right now. And I would say broader, Sonora, Arizona, and Alberta. And some of those areas, look, we recognize that there's been some tough times in those regions, particularly around energy and elsewhere. But there's some great opportunities coming down the road. So with that, as we have about 15 minutes for questions, I'm happy to take a deeper dive into any of the issues. I know there's a lot of concern right now about labor issues in Mexico, and I just must give a shameless plug here and say none of this matters if we don't get back to normal and open up these borders in a post-COVID world. I think it was understandable what we did with keeping borders closed to people in the pandemic environment. We just had a great breakout session on the movement of people during the COVID era. But the three countries really have to focus right now. I think with all the other crises that are happening, the focus has been kind of lost. If we don't open up these borders soon in a truly reasonable way and one that's safe, our physical security will be threatened by a lack of economic security. And I just urge our three countries to get focused on that, then use this trade deal and actually use the trade deal. What I am concerned about right now is that it wasn't the Biden administration that negotiated this deal. And AMLO wasn't exactly a huge fan of it either. And the Trudeau government kind of came along with it. And so what I hope the three countries do is recommit to using, there are more than, depending on how you count, 24 to 33 cross-governmental working groups put in USMCA, because all of us that were working on this issue, all of us knew one important lesson from the NAFTA. The NAFTA was so much work went into that agreement, but the day it passed Congress, people went home and just let it sit. And companies were able to use it, but it was not refreshed over time. And then it became the punching bag that it became. What we wanted to do in USMCA is to make it a living, breathing entity. And I really hope that our three countries double down and really get those working groups on competitiveness and elsewhere so that we continue to use the USMCA as a way to refresh our economy. Otherwise, it ain't going to be 25 years before people start using it as a punching bag. In this day and age, it just takes 2 minutes for something to go viral and all of a sudden. So we really have to make sure that we're using USMCA. And so with that, I'll turn it back to our excellent moderator and happy to take any of your questions and can get in the reads as folks desire.
Hi, Daniel, this is Emily. Thank you so much. And thank you for that very informative presentation. Our first question does have two parts. So can you go into more specifics on the digital trade part of the agreement? And why is the inclusion of digital trade stipulations important?
Yeah, that's a great question. Both parts. I hope it sounds like a lawyer. I'll ask one question in 27 parts. That's my MO usually. But the digital trade, it's important to keep in mind that Al Gore hadn't invented the internet when we did the NAFTA the first time around, and that's a joke. I mean that in purely funny way, even though it's not a great joke. But the fact is that technology, we were way behind in NAFTA. And of course, we all know that's the world we live in, right? I have a 10-year-old running around this house as we speak right now, probably with AirPods in his ears. He just finished up a class, and I guarantee he's watching a YouTube on something because he's watching a YouTube of kids playing video games. I don't understand what these kids do half the time, but go outside. But the important piece was that we really didn't have, there was the opportunity for some of our subnational governments, so states, metros, to try to kind of cut each other's throats, right? And requiring, hey, as a way to attract digital investment, that it wouldn't be based on market principles, but you have to locate your servers here. So we prohibited data localization. We also prohibited things like any of the three countries needing to raise revenue and putting taxes or customs duties on digital transfers. Now, that's been the case for a long time, but we wanted to make sure that was an agreement because when times get tough, governments start looking to tax things. So what we wanted to do is make North America a place where we could actually make it a very viable market for investment. And we're already seeing this. Nearshoring, and I don't want to get into the offshoring, reshoring, but nearshoring in the IT space. So many of us know that so much of the technology industry went to India or other parts in Asia. But one of the challenges, and particularly because of English speakers, that was a big part of it, and low cost. But what we're seeing is a lot of reshoring into Mexico as well as other parts of Central and South America on technology and bringing some of that tech talent here because there are talented folks in Mexico. There's a lot of tech talent in the Valley, Sun Valley, right? Half of Silicon Valley has moved to the Sun Valley these days. No question about that because it's cheaper. You don't have to deal with California. But we're seeing the same thing around Calgary as well. great technology innovations happening there in that corridor. And so North America right now is the safest place in which to do technology business. And I think it's important we get things right. There is going to be a dispute around digital services taxes. A U.S. close call whether that violates USMCA or not. But right now, as a continent, there is no safer place in which to do technology business. And it's not just the digital chapter. This gets into nerdy lawyer talk, but we did a lot on intellectual property as well. So we made sure that the three countries had very similar protections in certain areas around IP, around patents in particular, trademarks, et cetera, in the goal that that would encourage more investment here. And so just so that if you develop the product in the United States, it wouldn't have different protections in Canada in terms of timelines and things like that. So we're moving, and that's going to take some time to implement, but that should be good news for the tech community here. I fundamentally believe that North America is the best place in which to make a technological investment right now. And we haven't even really seen USMCA kick in on that.
Do you feel that as of now, the labor expectations in the USMCA are being met or can be met within a certain period of time?
Sorry, I had to hydrate there. I think the jury's still out. Look, I'm bullish, obviously. You can see I'm animated, I'm excited. It's my baby in a way, but it's also because I believe in it. And working with companies, I have seen companies go through the USMCA compliance process and get out on the other side and say, wow, we just saved tens of millions of dollars. Just based on one change in a chapter. We just became more efficient. This is going to be a great opportunity for us. My strongest urging, though, is we as the private sector, we have to use it, right? We have to get up to speed right now. And look, it's understandable that after the year our companies just had, come on. We're still catching our breath in a lot of ways, and we still have massive global supply chain disruptions right now. Good luck finding a container these days, right? All these people building container houses, come on, give us some of those. We need to ship some freight. But the other piece of it is I really hope that our three countries use it. My fear is that USMCA will kind of go on the back shelf. And we're seeing a little bit of this in all three countries. We're seeing the Biden administration go off and issue these executive orders and do things. We're seeing the Trudeau government do some things on regulatory issues around plastics and elsewhere. We're seeing some things as well in Mexico with AMLO doing something new almost every day. What I really hope is our three countries recommit to the agreement so that we can get there. And we have and I think it really starts with staffing up those committees. I'm an ex-government guy. I don't always believe in trilateral committees and bureaucracy. I also think an important piece, and I know that the Biden-Harris administration committed to doing this in their early phone calls with the Trudeau government and the AMLO government, is to what's affectionately known as the Three Amigos Summit, get together for the North American Leaders Summit. But I hope that the NOWS, as it's commonly known, does not become a replacement for USMCA. I always say in North America, we need kind of the parent role. And again, I've mentioned my 10-year-old a few times, but anybody that's ever raised a child knows one thing. First of all, children can be pretty manipulative at a very early age. And I have a great kid. I love the kid. I love him more than anything. But kids know how to play parents off each other. So what do you do as a parent very early on? Did you ask your mother? Did you ask your father? Because if folks aren't getting the answer. And it's just a check-in, right? It's just a check-in. We need the parent role in North America. Before our three countries do something, or any one of our one countries, and I think this would actually apply to our states and metro as well, is to build those relationships among our leaders to say, hey, before we do this, did anybody think to ask the folks across the border in Mexico or the folks in Canada? Now, you don't have to ask for permission, but what are their views on this? Because our economies are so inextricably intertwined that when we do something on one side of the border, it's going to impact the other side. And so that's where what Phoenix Sister Cities is doing is so important, is building those relationships. So the elected officials, many of whom you see today, pick up the phone and say, hey, what about this? Is this going to bother you all up there? And we do a lot with our state legislators at places like NCLS and the Council of State Governments, which has a great Canada-U.S. committees. And I know that there's a lot of that going on between our governors, certainly the governor of Arizona and his counterparts in Mexico and Sonora in particular. So a lot of that goes on. Our premiers and governors meet, but that's what's important. We need the parent role in North America, but we'll get there on USMCA. And that's up to us, I kind of come back to, somebody like Carol Colombo and Governor Ducey and others that were out there every day, and Glenn Williamson and others saying, pay attention to what we're doing in Arizona on USMCA. And we need to keep doing that. We cannot just say this agreement's done and let it sit on a shelf. Sorry, you can tell I get animated about that subject. Happy to take another question.
It's great. Thank you, Daniel. So much of the USMCA was constructed in opposition to China. Other than China, is there another country of which we should be aware in working with Hermosillo, Phoenix, and Calgary?
In terms of opposition, yes, there's no question. I've said for a long time, USMCA was more about China than it was about the three countries. And it really took, I think, both Canada and Mexico some time to realize that the idea that in particular Mexico was still going to be where you're still going to be able to bring in product that invests in Mexico from China into Mexico and bring it in through the back door. That's a large part of what USMCA tries to stop. I'm not necessarily sure there's other regions. I've spent a lot of my time over the last several years moving companies into places like Vietnam and Malaysia and Thailand and elsewhere. And the key, though, for those companies is you just don't take what you were doing in China and move it to Vietnam, or take what you were doing in China, have it stop over, transship through Vietnam, and put a Vietnamese label and expect it to work. What you actually have to do is actually move, have substantial transformation in Vietnam. And the idea there is for a country like Vietnam, is that the US, Mexico, and Canada have some leverage to ensure that country is meeting fair trade practices and currency practices and labor standards eventually. I don't really think at the end of the day that our folks in the three governments are against trade or want to stop global trade. What they want is balanced trade. The word in the Trump administration, and particularly by USTR Lighthizer, was rebalanced trade. I think there is a very fine line, almost invisible line, between rebalanced trade, the trade agenda that we saw in the last administration, and the rebuilding agenda of the Biden-Harris administration, or building back better, right? I just like to keep the same words with R. So this is the trajectory that we're on, and I think there's going to be great opportunities in North America in terms of developing relationships. As I said, I do think using the CETA, Canada's agreement with the European Union, Mexico has a similar agreement with the EU and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But I just want to be clear, I don't see any scenario where the U.S. is joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the deal with Asia, now known as the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. I don't see that happening anytime soon, because any trade deal the U.S. does will have to look like USMCA, and particularly around labor and the environment, to get through Congress. And I don't see any other country around the world agreeing to that, like Vietnam. And so, but that's an important point as to why USMCA is so important. If companies can build experience and expertise around how to work USMCA, whatever we do next is going to look a lot like that. So if you build that capability, we're not going back. Nothing will look like the trade agreements that we did pre-USMCA. They'll never get through Congress. Never. USMCA is the lodestar for where we're going. I think there's time for one more question at least.
Yeah.
If I can keep it short.
Do you feel the USMCA provides any real protection to businesses and/or investors establishing in any of the three markets? So, for example, Canadian investors going to Mexico.
Yeah, well, the old NAFTA, and this is a longer answer, but the old NAFTA had what's called investor state dispute resolution, which is the large concern was, I'll just be candid, was about Mexico in the late 80s, early 90s, was if companies started investing in Mexico, that there would be some kind of nationalization, expropriation, takings, and then we would need a mechanism. So there was a mechanism that where private sector actors could bring claims against government for government actions. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the short story. Unfortunately, that provision started taking a lot of heat because it was used to challenge environmental laws. And a mining company goes into a particular region, and all of a sudden, the rules change, and then there's a challenge to the environmental laws. So particularly the progressive left hated it, and most of that has been removed. There is some grandfathering in of those provisions. So what was in NAFTA still has some legacy time, depending on how you count. There are some provisions still for investments in Mexico from the U.S. into Mexico. that are subject to government contracting, like large infrastructure projects. And there's a very specific list. That was part of the negotiations, was what was on that list. So just put it this way, for big infrastructure projects, there's still protections. But I think the one point is that I would say is we may need something like that for a while. But the truth is, Mexico in particular, has attracted so much investment. I think at some point there's going to be a recognition that Mexico's not going to shoot itself in the foot, right? And the same in the United States and Canada, right? And so I tend to believe that we're rapidly moving to a point where those investor protections will just be through the rule of law. Now, there are some issues with the current government in Mexico. And we're living in that in real time. But that's going to play out. But I actually, look, other than the pandemic, there's no slowdown with investment in Mexico right now, at least among my clients. We're looking at projects right now in Mexico. And I think just as important is we're looking at even more projects in Canada and Mexico, in Canada and the United States as well. That's the goal. And I can tell you, overseas clients, I do a lot of work with companies in Europe and Asia and elsewhere that don't see Canada, the United States, and Mexico as different places. They're looking at it as a continental relationship, and frankly, as a gateway to the rest of the Americas. And so there is significant interest. Now, some of it's quiet because you can't get here to visit the site or what have you. But I actually believe that as USMCA comes into operation, it's actually going to encourage more investment if we use it. So I see we're in our final seconds here. I don't know if there's a wrap up, or should I turn it back to you? But I'm happy. And again, I just truly appreciated the opportunity to be here today and look forward to continuing to work with so many of you. And thank you again to Rita and the entire team at Phoenix Sister Cities. Thank you.